Who is the founder of the Black Coffee Rose and has brought this exhibition to the museum today. Welcome,
Thank you. Good evening. Thank you for coming out. Thank you for being prepared to listen to me. I'm going to be walking around the exhibition, so I'd like you to follow me. I'm going to try and take you on a journey to understand how the African Black Caribbean contributed to the war and go through the various different stages that we have here. I created the Black Poppy Rose 6 years ago to remember the African, the Black, Caribbean and Pacific Islanders' contributions to war since the 16th century. Because through studying history, I started to realise that African history becomes more combined with European history at that period of time. And although growing up here, I was grown to the understanding of more of a slavery narrative, through my own studies I've been realising that there's a lot more to African history than what's been given to me. So it's my job, as I learn, to be able to go out and share that with people who would like to learn more, who would like to understand more about the African perspective. So, this is what they look like. They are available today if you'd like one. The box over there is information that I've been putting together for the last 6 years. That's my son on the front this now. Because without the future, we have no next generation. So the idea is so that if they know how to carry on to do more things for the future. So, is everybody familiar with the First World War? Do we know when it started? So it started in 1914. So many people say, well, what does the war have to do with Africa? Does many people know that the war was fought in Africa? Yes, sir.
Well, I lived in Kenya for 6 years, and I've read a couple of books on the subject, so I do know a bit about it.
Excellent.
And I was staggered to find that the Germans treated their troops abominably, yet after the war, in about 1952, they started paying them pensions. And as people claim the pension, and so they probably asked them to utter some worse German words that they would have picked up when serving. If they knew those German words, they got their pension.
They also asked them to do the drills, because if they remembered the drills, then they would know that they were servicemen. So it wasn't just, oh, did you serve and you came? So just like you had to actually prove that you had served. Thank you, sir. So I'm going to take you a little bit further back before 1914 to a time called the time period of 1884, 1885. So at that time there was a scramble for Africa, and Otto von Bismarck of Germany, he called for the Berlin Conference because Germany had been consolidating their own empire, and they felt they wanted to have more say at the table as Britain and France had. So they had a meeting, and at that meeting, these countries, Belgium, Britain, France, Germany, Italy, Portugal and Spain, were able to secure themselves within the continent of Africa. So they literally carved it up like cake. So you see these straight lines, these were used with rulers, as opposed to having the natural grain of the land, say, divided by mountains, rivers, lakes, so on and so forth. So as you can see, the blue region, it's a large region, was owned by the French. The orange regions, although it's spaced out, Britain owned a large part of Africa. The Belgian Congo was given to King Leopold, and there were great atrocities that took place there before the First World War. And I don't cover that because that's a whole session in itself, so only get onto that a little bit. And then we have the green regions, which belong to Germany. So if you notice, Britain surrounding Germany, Portugal, Britain again surrounding Germany. Here we have France and Britain, and here we have France and Britain again surrounding Germany. So when the war's happening, Germany's surrounded by all sides by his enemy. So along with the lines, before the lines came, there were different groups, African, different nations within those areas. So when the lines came, it then separated brothers and sisters, mothers and fathers, families, things like that. And this also had an impact on language, because then once you're no longer with the rooted language, language then adapts through adversity, through movement, things like that. So Africa was changing in the later part of the 1700s, not that it hadn't been before, but in regards to now the scramble for Africa and the need for creating police forces and armies on land so that they'd be able to protect their regions from other Europeans trying to re-steal them after the Berlin Conference. So this is what took place. So they started to mobilise police forces, armed forces, so they could protect their lands, and this now has spiralled on forward to when we get to 1914. So the cause of the war was the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria. So again, you think to yourself, well, how did that create a world war? Because surely Serbia and Austria-Hungary should have been the only countries warring together. Not that we advocate war, just so we're saying, right? But surely that should have just led to two countries. How did Russia get involved? How did England get involved? How did Germany get involved? France, and so on and so forth. Because before, at the Berlin Conference, who would have been the most allied countries? France and Britain. So so if something happens to France, Britain's coming. If something happens to Britain, then France should be coming, right? This is what also happened with the other countries, because they were disgruntled that they didn't get enough, or what they felt was worthy of them having a share. So they started to partner up. This is why when the war's now coming, people are now coming to serve somebody else's aid. So Archduke Ferdinand was assassinated. This led to the First World War. But you would believe that the first shots would have been fired in Europe. They weren't. This leads us to the African experience. So on the 7th of August 1914, an African soldier from the West African Frontier Force, the Gold Coast Regiment from the West African Frontier Force, yes, Al-Haji Grunshi, he fired the first shot in Togoland, which is German territory. So they only had a police force here in the German territory. In the other German territories, they had soldiers called the Schutztruppe. They didn't have them in Togoland, they just had a police force because it was a much smaller area. But he fired the first shot, Al-Haji Grunshi, which led on to other shots being fired throughout the war. So this started the war on the continent of Africa. Within Africa, the French had troops called the Senegalese Tirailleurs. So in this region, although they're called the Senegalese Tirailleurs, they had mobilized Africans throughout all the regions of Africa, of their French West Africa, French Equatorial Africa, and had mobilized them in Senegal to be able to take them and send them. So they also saw war on the Western Front. So they were also at the Battle of the Somme. They were also at Passchendaele. They were also serving throughout West and East Africa. So the Germans had the Schutztruppe in Belgium. Because the Germans had invaded Belgium, Belgium had to flee to French territories, and they mobilized armies there. There were 21 different nations in Belgium, and what they realized is that people would only protect their own people. So it made it beneficial to keep nations together for them to be able to fight more effectively. So there were 21 different battalions for the Belgian Congo, because there were 21 groups of people.
Were done on tribal basis.
Yes, yeah. And this was a general feature, because you would protect your own more than you would somebody who you didn't have any kind of spiritual affiliation with. So that's who else? Portugal was only in the war for 6 days, because they hadn't 6 days because they were still dealing with warfare with the Africans within the regions that they had occupied. So they hadn't quite secured their regions as yet. So they only spent 6 days in the war. So Africa was in the war from the start, and again, Africa was filled with resources, hence the scramble for Africa, because without Africa, the war wouldn't have lasted almost 5 years. So even though there were men serving, there were women who were a part of the wars, children, they were used as spies, they were used to collect food. A lot of families and nations were displaced. So they used to go in and ransack villages, take men to join in the armies, to use as porters. Within Africa, there were over 1 million porters who were used for the war to carry ammunition, carry food, carry weaponry. They had to maneuver tanks and all kinds of instruments throughout the continent. And there were different terrains which horses or mules or the transportation couldn't get to. So there was a lot of manpower that was needed. So there were a lot of young men, young women who were also being used within the war. But this narrative isn't talked about, because when we look at war, we generally look at the soldiers. We don't look at what's left behind or how things are impacted. Wells were poisoned. They used to say they put up signs to say, don't poison the well, but not everybody speaks the same language. So I don't quite know how many signs they would have had to put up around there for everybody to be able to get that. So that's just a brief bit on Africa, but it's so much more, because Africa is a continent, and I think we forget that regularly. So it gets us onto the British experience. So in this country, 1914, they had established the Aliens Act, Nationality of Aliens Act, of which it only allowed 1 alien to every 50 white servicemen who could serve in a battalion. This wasn't only just for Africans, this was for the Polish, anybody of European descent that they didn't consider to be British. But this meant that there would be 1 blackface amongst 50. And how well would that blackface be documented? within the wars. We have Private John Williams. So he was one of the first soldiers within the war for Britain to receive a VC, Victoria Cross, and he served. You don't get a Victoria Cross for doing nothing. You don't get medals for doing nothing. So although they had the law where the Africans or black soldiers couldn't rise above a rank of a sergeant, when you're seeing men being second lieutenants, you're seeing men who are gallant within their behaviour, within their conduct, and they're fighting very strongly for the country that they call home. Because when we came to fight, this was because we were serving our country, our home country, we were serving our king, because we were all part of the empire. So there were a number of men who were attributed to fighting this country. Norman Manley, first Prime Minister of Jamaica, he was here studying at Oxford. He joined the war through Britain. He wasn't in the British West Indies Regiment, he was fighting for this country. George Beamad, another man from Jamaica, he also was here studying. So it's not abnormal for black people to be in this country. So before, in the Edwardian period, 1901 to 1914, there were many Africans and black people here in this country. Samuel Coleridge Taylor, who was a famous composer, just to name one. And these men, as you see the dates, were born 1888, Walter Tull. So Walter Tull was one of the first black men to play professionally for Tottenham Hotspurs. He joined the army. He was in, where was he? Northampton. He played for Sixfield Stadium. And what they were doing at the time is that they were trying to recruit footballers because people were following footballers and it was fashionable. So whatever the footballers were doing, they wanted everybody else to be doing. So they used to recruit whole teams and have football teams within the army, of which their fans would then sign up to join, so they could still watch their teams play. So they still were able to play and train at the same time. So Walter Tull, he was promoted to second lieutenant. Again, do you do nothing to get promoted? So he was very, very focused. He was very, very strong. He was very, very determined within the war, within his own self, and was able to do things that other people thought were amazing. He served at the Battle of Somme. He fought in France and he had to return home because he became injured and then returned again. He died in Arras. I think it's Farbouge de Arras. Pardon my French, I don't speak French. But I went to France, to Arras, to find where his name is on the board, and I found it. And we have a black poppy rose wreath, so I laid one there in memory of him. But he is, I guess, our poster serviceman here in this country. So most people know about him. They made a £5 coin with his face on a few years ago. But his story is told. But we still have many, many more stories that aren't told. But Walter is one of our favourite servicemen, so we've made a song and things about that we sing in schools and things like that, so the children have more feel to what we're doing. So we've moved from Africa to Britain, now we're going to the West Indies.